There are thousands of abandoned mansions in the world due to their basement horror stories. When Lucy and her husband Daniel decided to buy their first home, they thought they found the perfect place. A charming house on a quiet street in a neighborhood that felt like it was straight out of a postcard. The house was an old colonial with a large front porch, big windows that let in the sunlight, and a sprawling backyard perfect for their 2 children. It wasn't a brand new house, but it had character, something the couple had always admired. The basement was something of an afterthought. It was just a small, unfinished space with old stone walls and a low ceiling. It was perfect for storing things they didn't need, and Lucy thought it would make a great place for a small laundry area. It wasn't until after they moved in that she began to feel uneasy whenever she went near it. At first, it was just a feeling, an inexplicable sense of dread that seemed to grow stronger with every visit. Every time she would head downstairs to grab something from storage, the air felt heavier, colder. The basement felt wrong. But Lucy dismissed it as her imagination getting the best of her. Daniel, ever the practical one, wasn't concerned. He made a point of bringing up the basement whenever they had a conversation about home improvements, and he insisted that it was the least of their worries. But even he couldn't deny that the longer they lived in the house, the more they found strange things in the basement. It started with the noises. One night, after putting the kids to bed, Lucy heard a faint tapping sound coming from the basement. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, steady, rhythmic. At first, she assumed it was a house settling. Old houses often made strange noises, especially at night, she reasoned. But as the night wore on, the tapping continued. And it wasn't just tapping anymore. Now it sounded like something or someone was scratching at the walls. Lucy tried to ignore it, telling herself it was probably a rodent or some other harmless creature. But as the days went by, the sounds didn't stop. They only seemed to grow louder, as though whatever was making them was getting closer and closer. Then came the door. One evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Lucy was alone in the living room when she heard the unmistakable sound of the basement door opening. It was subtle at first, but it grew louder, like someone or something was trying to force it open. She froze, the blood draining from her face. She hadn't touched the door all day. She didn't even remember it being closed. Heart racing, she stood up and walked the stairs. Slowly, she descended into the basement, her footsteps echoing through the empty house. The door at the bottom of the stairs was wide open, but when she reached the bottom, everything seemed still. Too still. Lucy took a deep breath and stepped inside. The smell of mildew and old wood hung in the air. It was dark, but she could make out the shadows of old furniture and boxes scattered around. The light bulb overhead flickered weakly, casting erratic shadows on the walls. She stood there for a moment, scanning the room, but there was no sign of anyone. But then she saw it. There, in the farthest corner of the basement, was a door. It was small, too small, almost as if it had been hidden from view on purpose. The door was old, the wood splintered, the hinges rusted. But it wasn't the door itself that made Lucy's stomach churn. It was what was carved into it. At first, she couldn't make out the symbols. But as she stepped closer, she saw that they were not random scratches. They were words written in some kind of scrawl, their edges jagged and uneven. She couldn't read them, but the feeling of unease grew stronger the closer she got. Without thinking, she reached for the doorknob. It turned with ease, though she had expected it to be locked. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a small, hidden room beyond it. The air inside was stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. Lucy hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, her flashlight flicking across the room. What she saw made her blood run cold. The room was small, barely big enough for a single person to stand comfortably. There was a desk in the corner, covered in old papers, and a chair facing the corner, as though someone had been sitting there for hours, staring at the wall. But the most disturbing thing was the floor. There, in the center of the room, was a patch of bare wood, slightly raised above the rest of the floorboards. Lucy knelt down, her heart pounding in her chest, and ran her fingers over the raised wood. It gave slightly, as though it were a hidden compartment. Slowly, she pried the wood loose, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside the compartment, wrapped in an old cloth, was a bundle of photographs. Dozens of them stacked haphazardly on top of each other. She lifted them out carefully, one by one. Each photograph showed a different person, a family, a couple, children, all posing for the camera in front of the house, smiling, looking happy. But as she flipped through the photographs, she saw something that made her freeze. In every photograph, there was a man standing in the background, half hidden in the shadows, his face obscured. He was always the same man, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a sinister smile that never quite reached his lips. Lucy's hands trembled as she turned over the last photo. It was an old family portrait, and in the corner, barely visible, was the man again, his eyes staring straight at the camera, locked onto the viewer. And then she noticed something even more disturbing. The date written in the bottom corner of the photograph. The year was 1924. Lucy felt her stomach turn. The photos weren't just old, they were centuries old. And the man in the background, he wasn't just anyone. He looked like he had been haunting this house for decades. But why? And why had these photos been hidden beneath the floorboards? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound, soft but unmistakable. A slow, deliberate scraping noise coming from behind her. Lucy spun around, the flashlight shaking in her hand. The door she had just entered was now closed, but the scratching noise was still coming from behind it. Someone or something was on the other side. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. No response, just the scraping sound getting louder, as though something was desperately trying to get through. Panic surged in her chest. She grabbed the flashlight, backing toward the exit. But then, from behind the door, she heard it, a voice. It was soft, raspy, and faint, but it was unmistakable. "Let me out." Lucy's heart stopped. She rushed up the stairs, her pulse racing, and slammed the basement door shut behind her. She ran to the kitchen, shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She tried to calm herself, to rationalize the situation, but nothing made sense. Who was that man in the photos? Why was he trapped in the basement? And who, or what, was begging to be let out? Tom was still asleep in their bedroom. He didn't hear her frantic footsteps or the door slammed shut behind her. She couldn't tell him about what she had found. He'd never believe her. The next morning, Lucy packed her things in silence. She didn't know where they would go or how they would get there, but she knew one thing for sure. The basement held a secret, one that was far too dangerous for them to uncover. And as she looked back at the house one last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man from the photographs was still watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge once again. The basement secret will remain locked away forever. But in the darkness, something was stirring, eager to be freed. Late at night, Clara hears knocks and footsteps from the basement. What she doesn't know is that a murdered tenant's ghost still haunts the dark corners, waiting for revenge. The old Victorian house at the edge of the town had always intrigued Clara when she passed by. Its dark, Gothic architecture towered over the other homes, the stone facade weathered by time but still majestic. But when the opportunity came for her to rent the basement apartment, she jumped at the chance. It was cheap, secluded, and the location was perfect for someone like her, someone who valued their privacy. The apartment itself was surprisingly spacious. The wooden floors creaked beneath her feet, and the rooms were lined with old wood paneling, giving it a nostalgic charm. Clara had moved in just a week ago, and as she settled in, she couldn't help but admire the house's eerie beauty. The high ceilings, the large windows that let in enough light to brighten her small, cluttered living space. The house spoke to her in a way few places ever had. But that wasn't the only thing the house spoke to her about. It started with the noises. At first, Clara thought it was a house settling. After all, it was an old building, and it creaked and groaned like a ship at sea. But as the days passed, the noises grew harder to ignore. It wasn't just the usual creaks of wood. There were distinct knocking sounds that came from the basement, knocking that sounded almost deliberate. It was always at night. Clara had tried to brush it off. It was probably pipes or rodents, things that could easily be explained. But when she woke up on her second night to the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing from the basement, her curiosity took hold. The house felt strangely alive in the quiet of the night, and the basement, with its old stone walls and dim lighting, seemed to be the source of an ominous presence. She decided to investigate. The door to the basement was heavy, old, and made of solid wood. It had a tarnished brass handle, and as Clara turned it, she felt a cold rush of air greet her. She hesitated for a moment, but then curiosity pushed her forward. The basement was dimly lit by a single overhead light that flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the stone walls. There were piles of old boxes, furniture draped with dusty sheets, and a faint smell of mildew in the air. The sounds were louder now, almost deafening as Clara descended the narrow stairs. The floor beneath her feet groaned with each step, as if protesting her presence. She could feel the chill creeping through her clothes, the temperature dropping as she moved deeper into the basement. There was something unsettling about the place, something that sent a shiver down her spine. And then she heard again. A knock, followed by a shuffle, then silence. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. The knocking didn't sound like it was coming from the walls, or even from the pipes. It sounded human. Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the basement, searching for the source of the noise. She stepped further into the room, her eyes darting around, trying to make sense of the empty space. But as she reached the far corner of the room, her gaze landed on something that made her freeze. A strange stain on the floor, dark and uneven, as though something had been spilled or soaked into the wood. Her stomach twisted as she bent down, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the stain. It was still wet. Clara jumped back, startled, and then her eyes landed on a small, broken piece of furniture against the wall. A chair. But it wasn't just any chair. It looked like it had been dragged, scratched along the floor, and it was positioned at an odd angle, as though someone had hastily moved it. Suddenly, Clara felt the cold, heavy weight of someone or something watching her. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the basement itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the light bulb overhead flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Clara's pulse quickened. She fumbled for her phone, the flashlight illuminating only a small area around her. Her breath came in short gasps, and her mind raced with possibilities. Was it just her imagination? Then she heard it again, a low, guttural whisper from the darkness, too quiet to fully hear but unmistakable in its intent. Clara's blood ran cold. "Get out!" The voice was weak, hoarse, but undeniably human. Her legs moved on their own as she turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind her. She leaned against the door, panting, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her thoughts swirled in a chaotic frenzy. Had she just imagined it? But she knew she hadn't. The voice was real. The presence was real. Something was down there. The next morning, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered over her. She tried to go about her day, but her mind kept returning to the basement, to the stain on the floor and the whisper in the dark. There had to be an explanation. As she sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee, Clara heard a knock on the door. She opened it to find Mrs. Harris, the elderly woman from next door, standing on her porch with concerned expression. "Good morning, dear. I thought I'd come over to check on you," Mrs. Harris said, her voice sweet but carrying an air of hesitation. "I heard some noises last night from the basement." Clara froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Harris glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. It's nothing, really. Just an old house, you know? The house has a history. I thought you should know." Clara's blood ran cold. "What kind of history?" The elderly woman sighed, her hands trembling slightly. "There was a man, a tenant, who lived there long before you moved in. He wasn't a good man. There were rumors about him, about the things he did. He disappeared one night. The police never found him, but people say he was murdered." Clara's eyes widened. "Murdered? In the basement?" Mrs. Harris nodded gravely. "The house has a way of keeping things hidden, dear. There are things in the walls, things that don't want to be found. And the man who was murdered, his ghost still haunts that basement. I've heard his footsteps, his whisper." Clara's head spun. She felt as if the world was spinning out of control. Her eyes flickered nervously toward the basement door. She had to know more. Where did this man come from? Why was he murdered? His name was Thomas, a drifter of sorts. He stayed here for a while in the house. It doesn't forget. People said he angered the wrong people, but no one really knows for sure. All I can tell you is that you need to stay away from that basement. That voice you heard? It wasn't just your imagination. The house, it doesn't want you here. Clara's thoughts were a blur. Was it really the ghost of a murdered man that haunted the basement? Or was there something more to the story? Something darker? The whispers, the footsteps, everything she had experienced. It was all too real. She knew she couldn't leave it like this. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara found herself once again at the top of the basement stairs. This time, she wasn't going to run. This time, she was going to face whatever was down there. With trembling hands, she reached for the door and opened it. The basement was darker than she remembered, the air heavy with an almost palpable sense of foreboding. Her flashlight flickered as she stepped inside, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. And then she heard it again, the knock, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone dragging their feet across the floor. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath, her pulse racing as she moved deeper into the basement. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Get out!" And then the voice stopped. Clara turned to find a shadow standing in the far corner of the room. She froze, the blood draining from her face. The figure was tall, gaunt, and its eyes were hollow. It stepped forward, its face half hidden in the shadows, a sinister smile creeping across its lips. "Why are you here?" the ghost whispered, its voice raspy, yet somehow full of anger. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have uncovered the truth." Clara's legs buckled beneath her as the figure moved closer. She tried to scream, but the words caught in her throat. The ghost's presence was suffocating, filling the basement with a palpable sense of dread. And then, as if from nowhere, the floor beneath her gave way, and Clara was swallowed by the darkness. The next morning, the house was silent again. The basement was empty, but in the shadows, Clara's voice whispered on the wind.